Ambassador Lena Vasquez stood at the podium inside the United Nations Stellar Affairs Building in Geneva and looked out at the rows of alien diplomats who had come to discuss humanity's future among the stars. It was the year 2187, and Earth had made first contact with the Galactic Council only 9 years ago, a governing body of 43 alien species that had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for over 12,000 years. And now humanity wanted a seat at the table. The Galactic Council had granted Earth observer status, which meant humans could watch but not vote, could listen but not speak with authority. They were considered a young species, barely worth noticing, and Lena had spent the last 3 years trying to change that. She smiled at the delegates as she spoke about cooperation, about shared knowledge, about peace between worlds, but she could see the cold eyes of Arbiter Zhou Ken watching her from the far side of the chamber. Zhou Ken was the High Speaker of the Vylori Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. His skin was pale silver, and his 4 eyes never blinked. And when he looked at Lena, it was the way a man might look at an insect crawling across his dinner plate. He did not hate humans. That would have required him to think of them as equals. He simply believed they were a problem that needed to be managed. And on that same day, while Lena gave her speech about hope and friendship, Arbiter Zhou Ken was holding a very different meeting in a sealed chamber 3 levels below the council hall. Around a curved table sat representatives from the 7 eldest species of the council, the Vylori, the Kreth Collective, the Tharn Empire, and 4 others who had ruled the stars since before humans had learned to make fire. Zhou Ken placed a single document before them. It was called Resolution 7 Omega, and its contents were simple and terrible. Humans breed too fast, he told them. Their population was growing at a rate that would destabilize the galactic economy within 3 generations. Their minds were aggressive and unpredictable, and if they were allowed to spread unchecked, they would consume everything the Council had built over 12 millennia. The solution he proposed was what the Council called a population correction, a targeted reduction of Earth's numbers to what the elder species considered a manageable level. Some of the delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none of them said no, because in 12,000 years of galactic rule, the Council had done this before to other species, and it had always worked. The corrected species always fell in line, always accepted, always submitted. They voted unanimously, and Resolution 7 Omega was approved. 3 days later, the sky above Earth changed forever. It began at exactly 11:47 in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time. 200 orbital platforms exited slick space in a perfect ring around the planet, appearing so suddenly that Earth's defense satellites did not even have time to send an alert. The platforms were enormous, each one the size of a small city, and they hummed with a sound that people on the surface could feel in their bones, even though they could not hear it. Then the weapons fired. They called it the bioresonance pulse, a wave of energy tuned specifically to the neural patterns of the human brain. It moved through walls, through shelters, through the Earth itself, and wherever it touched a human mind, it destroyed it in an instant. The pulse did not damage buildings or bridges or roads. It did not harm animals or plants or machines. It only killed people, and it did so with a precision that was almost beautiful in its horror. In Mumbai, 12 million people collapsed in the streets within seconds. Mothers fell while holding their children, and both of them were dead before they reached the ground. In Lagos, the markets went silent. One moment there was noise and life and color, and the next there was nothing but falling bodies and the distant sound of cooking pots boiling over on abandoned stoves. In Dhaka, school children dropped at their desks. Their teachers fell beside them. The ceiling fans kept spinning above rooms full of the dead. In Kinshasa, in Jakarta, in Karachi, in Addis Ababa, city after city after city was struck. The pulse swept across South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of South America. targeting the regions that the Council had calculated as having the highest redundant population density. 11 minutes. That was all it took. In 11 minutes, 1.2 billion human beings died. The hospitals that still had living staff were overwhelmed within the hour. But there was nothing to treat, because the dead were simply dead, their brains liquefied inside their skulls, while their bodies showed no outward mark of violence. They looked like they were sleeping. Then the message came. Every screen on Earth, every radio, every communication device lit up with a broadcast from the purification fleet in orbit. The message was calm and polite and delivered in perfect English, Mandarin, Hindi, and 40 other languages simultaneously. Population corrected, the voice said. Integration may now proceed. On behalf of the Galactic Council, you are welcome. In Geneva, Ambassador Lena Vasquez was in a bunker beneath the Stellar Affairs building when the numbers started coming in. She watched the death toll climb on a screen in front of her. 10 million, 50 million, 200 million, 500 million, and her hands did not shake. Around her, aides and diplomats were screaming and crying, and some of them had fallen to their knees. But Lena just stood there and watched the numbers rise. When the counter passed 1 billion, she closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, something had changed behind them. Something old and patient and very, very dangerous. Her aide, a young man named Thomas, grabbed her arm and asked her what they were going to do. Lena did not answer right away. She looked at the screen one more time, at the number that had now settled at 1.2 billion, and then she turned to face the room full of broken, terrified people. "They think this is the end," she said, and her voice was so quiet that everyone had to stop crying to hear her. "They think we will kneel and thank them and take our place as their pets." She paused and looked toward the ceiling, as if she could see through the concrete and steel and sky to the alien ships hanging above their world. "They will learn what they have awakened." No one in that room doubted her, not because she said it with anger or fire, but because she said it with the calm certainty of someone who had already seen the future and knew exactly what it held. Above the Earth, the purification fleet waited patiently for humanity's grateful response. They would be waiting for a very long time. The Galactic Council expected tears, and then silence, and then obedience. That was how it had always worked with other species. You killed enough of them, and the rest bent the knee, and the universe moved on. So when the Council sent its integration liaisons to Earth 6 weeks after the purification, they expected to find a broken species ready to be molded into something useful. What they found instead was something that should have terrified them, but they were too arrogant to see it. Every human they met smiled. Every government they visited cooperated fully. Every document they requested was delivered on time and in perfect order. The humans said yes to everything, agreed to every demand, signed every form, and bowed their heads with what looked like humble acceptance. The liaisons sent their reports back to the Council with great satisfaction. The correction was successful. The humans have accepted their place. They did not notice that the smiles never reached the eyes. They did not notice that every room they entered had already been swept for listening devices before they arrived. They did not notice that behind every polite handshake was a hand that wanted to close around a throat. Because beneath the surface of that polite, smiling Earth, something was being built. Within 3 months of the purification, representatives from every surviving nation on Earth gathered in a bunker carved into the rock beneath the Swiss Alps. Old enemies sat beside each other. Americans next to Russians, Indians next to Pakistanis, Israelis next to Iranians, and not one of them argued about borders or politics or history. They had all lost too many people for any of that to matter anymore. In that bunker, they created the United Earth Confederation, and it was not a government in any normal sense. It was a war machine wrapped in the skin of a government. Every law it passed, every budget it approved, every decision it made served a single purpose: to make the galaxy pay for what it had done. They chose their leader carefully. He was a man named General Idris Okonkwo, born in Nigeria, educated in Britain, trained in warfare across 3 continents. He was 54 years old, and he had lost his mother, his father, his wife, his 3 children, his 2 brothers, and every cousin and aunt and uncle he had ever known in the 11 minutes of the purification. Some men would have been destroyed by that kind of loss. Okonkwo was not destroyed. He was refined. His grief burned away everything soft and uncertain inside him, and left behind something as hard and sharp as a diamond blade. He did not want revenge. Revenge was emotional and sloppy and wasteful. What he wanted was something far more calculated. He wanted the galaxy to understand, in its bones and in its history books, for the next 10,000 years, that you do not touch humanity and survive unchanged. His first order was the creation of a facility beneath the Mariana Trench, 7 miles below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, hidden from every scanner the Council possessed. They called it the Forge. And inside it, the greatest minds humanity had ever produced went to work. They had captured fragments of Council technology during the purification, pieces of the orbital platforms that had malfunctioned, communication equipment left behind by the liaisons, and data stolen from Council databases by hackers who had broken through alien firewalls with nothing but human stubbornness and creativity. From these fragments, they built miracles. Dr. Aisha Patel, a physicist from what was left of Mumbai, cracked the mathematics behind slip space travel in 14 months, and then improved upon it. The Council's slick space drives were ancient technology, reliable but slow and easy to detect. Patel's version, which she called the Shatter Drive, was 3 times faster and completely invisible to Council sensors. A team of bioweapons engineers led by a quiet Korean man named Dr. Seo Jin-ho reverse-engineered the bioresonance pulse that had killed 1.2 billion people. But Jin-ho did not simply copy it. He perfected it and made it adjustable, capable of targeting any species' neural frequency. He called his creation the resonance mirror, and when he demonstrated it on a captured Velori laboratory animal, the creature collapsed in exactly the same way a human child had collapsed in a schoolyard in Dhaka. Jin-ho did not celebrate. He locked himself in his quarters for 2 days after the test. But when he came out, he handed the weapon specifications to General Okonkwo without a word. And then there were the ships. The old navies of Earth had possessed a handful of patrol vessels designed for peaceful exploration. These were scrapped and melted down and reborn as something terrible. The Wrath-class dreadnoughts were 2 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that mixed human ingenuity with stolen alien technology. They were not built to explore or to protect. They were built to break things that thought they could not be broken. Each one was named after a city that had lost more than 1 million souls in the purification. The Mumbai, the Lagos, the Dhaka, the Kinshasa, the Jakarta, the Karachi, and their crews volunteered in numbers that overwhelmed the recruitment offices. For every position on every ship, there were 100 applicants, and not one of them needed to be told what they were fighting for. But Okonkwo knew that weapons alone would not be enough. He needed eyes inside the enemy's house. So he created the Ashen. They were spies, hundreds of them, men and women who volunteered to leave Earth and enter Council space, disguised as the very thing the Council wanted humans to be. Obedient workers, humble servants, grateful survivors. They took jobs on alien space stations and in alien cities. They cleaned floors and served food and fixed machines and smiled their empty smiles while memorizing every detail of Council military installations, supply routes, fleet movements, and political alliances. They mapped 4,612 military targets across 19 star systems, and they sent their reports home through communication channels hidden inside the Council's own data networks. For 6 years this continued. 6 years of smiling and bowing and saying yes sir, while behind the mask, an entire species sharpened its teeth. The Council liaisons continued to send their cheerful reports. Integration proceeding smoothly, they wrote again and again. Humans are cooperative and docile, no signs of aggression. On the 6th anniversary of the purification, General Okonkwo stood in a command center buried deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland and looked at a wall-sized display of the galaxy. Every red dot represented a Council military asset that the Ashen had mapped. There were thousands of them, spread across hundreds of light years. His war council stood behind him, admirals and generals from every nation on Earth, united in a way that no threat had ever united humanity before. "We do not want a war," Okonkwo said, and his voice was steady and low. "We want a lesson, one they will remember for the next 12,000 years, one that will make every species in this galaxy think twice before they ever raise a hand against a world that did not ask for their attention." He turned to face them, and in his dark eyes there was no rage, no fire, no madness, only the cold, patient certainty of a man who had spent 6 years planning the most devastating military operation in the history of any species in the galaxy. Begin Operation Requiem. Across the Earth, in hidden shipyards and underground hangars and beneath the floors of oceans, engines began to hum. The sleeping giant was finally opening its eyes, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The attack began at exactly 11:47 Greenwich Mean Time, on the 6th anniversary of the purification, at the precise minute when 1.2 billion people had started dying, because General Okonkwo wanted the galaxy to understand that humanity remembered everything. Across 19 star systems, in the span of a single heartbeat, the universe changed. The first thing the Council lost was its voice. The Ashen operatives, those quiet, smiling humans who had spent 6 years cleaning floors and serving food on alien stations, moved at the same moment. In communication relay hubs, scattered across 400 light-years, small charges no bigger than a coin detonated inside critical junction points. The explosions were tiny, but perfectly placed, and in an instant, the entire communication network of the Galactic Council went dark. For the first time in over 8,000 years, the Council could not talk to its own fleets. Admirals could not reach their commanders. Commanders could not reach their ships. Governments could not reach each other. It was as if someone had reached into the nervous system of galactic civilization and severed the spine. Panic spread faster than any message could have. On dozens of worlds, Council military officers stared at dead screens and silent speakers and felt something they had not felt in living memory, the cold, creeping terror of not knowing what was happening. And then the human ships arrived. 36 Wrath-class dreadnoughts tore out of Shatter Drive directly inside Council defensive perimeters. Not approaching from a distance, the way any sane fleet would, but materializing in the middle of enemy formations, like ghosts stepping through walls. The Council's military doctrine was built on the assumption that no ship could exit slipspace with that kind of precision. Their defensive networks were designed to detect incoming vessels minutes before arrival and respond accordingly. But the shatter drives that Dr. Patel had built broke every rule the galaxy thought was unbreakable. The dreadnought Mumbai appeared less than 200 kilometers from the Velori home defense fleet, so close that the alien warships could see its hull with their naked eyes. The dreadnought Lagos materialized inside the Kreth Collective's forward staging area. The Dhaka, the Kinshasa, the Jakarta, each one emerged exactly where it would cause the maximum chaos. At Valor Prime, the homeworld of the species that had designed the purification, the battle lasted 4 hours, but it was not the kind of battle the Valori expected. The human fleet did not bomb their cities. It did not glass their continents. It did not kill their civilians. Instead, the Mumbai and 3 escort cruisers took up positions in orbit and deployed resonance mirrors, the same technology that had been used to murder 1.2 billion humans, now reversed and retuned to Velouri neural frequencies. But the humans did not fire the weapon at full power. They set it to 1/100%. Just enough to cause a splitting, blinding headache in every Velouri on the surface of the planet. 7 billion Velouri dropped to their knees at the same moment, clutching their heads, screaming in pain that was agonizing but not lethal. And then a human voice spoke over every frequency on the planet. "This is what mercy looks like," the voice said. "We could turn this weapon to full power and kill every one of you in 11 minutes, the same way you killed our people. But we are not you. Remember that we chose this. Remember that we held back. And remember that we can change our minds." The Velouri government surrendered within the hour. At the Tannhauser Corridor, the destruction of the Kreth war fleet was less merciful, but still precise. The Kreth Collective had the largest navy in the galaxy, over 3,000 warships crewed by a species that was born for combat, with armored exoskeletons and forearms, and a culture built entirely around military honor. General Okonkwo had studied the Kreth for years, and he knew that they could not be intimidated. They had to be broken. Human scout ships had spent months seeding the Tannhauser Corridor, a narrow passage of navigable space between 2 neutron stars, with thousands of microcharges hidden inside the nebular gas that filled the passage. When the Kreth fleet received a false distress signal from one of their own outposts and moved to respond, they poured into the corridor in standard battle formation, tight, disciplined, and exactly where the humans wanted them. The moment the bulk of the fleet was inside, human ships collapsed the entry point behind them with concentrated fire that destabilized the gravitational balance of the passage. And then the microcharges ignited the nebular gas. The Tannhauser Corridor became a tunnel of fire 8 light minutes long. 2,400 Kreth warships burned. 80% of the most powerful navy in the galaxy was gone in minutes. The survivors limped out of the far end of the corridor with melted hulls and shattered crews. And they did not regroup, because there was nothing left to regroup around. But it was what came next that truly won the war. Not a battle, but a broadcast. On the second day of Operation Requiem, while Council worlds were still reeling from the attacks, Earth transmitted a signal on every frequency in the galaxy. Military, civilian, emergency, entertainment, every channel carried the same thing. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a threat. It was a 12-year-old girl named Priya Anand, sitting in a small room on Earth with a single light above her and a list in her hands, and she was reading names. She had been orphaned in Mumbai during the purification. Her parents, her brother, her grandparents, her neighbors, her teachers, all of them had died in those 11 minutes. She had survived only because she had been visiting an aunt in London that week. And now she sat before a camera and read the names of the dead, one by one, slowly and clearly, in her small, steady voice. The names of mothers and fathers and children and grandparents and friends, names in Hindi and Yoruba and Bengali and Swahili and Tagalog and 100 other languages. The transmission ran for 9 continuous days without stopping. When Priya's voice grew tired, other children took her place. Orphans from Lagos and Dhaka and Kinshasa and Jakarta. Each one reading names from their own cities, their own neighborhoods, their own families. Across the galaxy, billions of aliens watched. Many of them had never thought about what 1.2 billion dead actually meant. It had been a number, a statistic, a policy decision. But now each of those numbers had a name and a face and a child who missed them. On 14 council worlds, spontaneous protests erupted. Citizens of species that had nothing to do with the purification demanded that their governments condemn it. The Salathi, a peaceful aquatic species, broadcast their own message in response. "We did not know. We are sorry. We stand with Earth." The council called an emergency session. Arbiter Zhou Ken stood before the remaining delegates and demanded a united military response. Demanded that every species send ships to crush the human rebellion. But the chamber was half empty. 12 species had already refused to attend. 7 more sat in silence and would not meet his eyes. The coalition that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years was cracking, and the sound of it breaking was the sound of a little girl reading names that the galaxy had never bothered to learn. The first 72 hours of Operation Requiem had been a symphony of precision and fury, but Arbiter Zhou Ken was not a fool, and he was not ready to surrender. In the weeks following the initial human strikes, he pulled together what remained of the Council's loyal forces. The Tharn Empire, whose warriors stood 9 feet tall and had fought wars since before Earth's dinosaurs went extinct. The remnants of the Kreth Collective, burning with shame and hunger for revenge. And the Orvani Technocracy, a species of brilliant engineers whose weapons factories produced more military hardware than the rest of the galaxy combined. Together they formed the Coalition of Order, and for the first time since the war began, humanity faced an enemy that was organized, motivated, and dangerous. The war entered a new phase, slower, grinding, and far more costly than the opening strikes had been. The first real test came at Proxima Station, humanity's forward operating base in Council space. It was a converted asteroid, hollowed out and reinforced, orbiting a dim red star at the edge of Tharn territory. And it held something that General Okonkwo refused to abandon. 200,000 civilians. They were aliens, Salathi, Dren, Vakari, and a dozen other species who had defected to humanity's side after the purification was exposed. They had fled Council space with nothing but what they could carry, and they had come to the humans for protection, because they believed that the species the Council had tried to destroy was more trustworthy than the species that had done the destroying. The Coalition fleet arrived at Proxima Station with 800 warships and surrounded it completely. Their commander, a Tharn general named Vas Khan, sent a simple message: surrender the station and the human forces inside it, and the alien refugees would be allowed to return to their homeworlds unharmed. Okonkwo's response was equally simple: come and take it. The siege of Proxima Station lasted 11 months. The Coalition bombarded the asteroid day and night. Tharn assault troops in heavy armor launched boarding actions through breaches in the hull. Orvani drone swarms attacked in waves of 10,000 at a time. And every single attack was met by human defenders who refused to give a single corridor without a fight. Commander Reza Ahmadi, a young Iranian officer who had been given command of the station's defense, became a legend during those 11 months. He slept 2 hours a night, ate standing up, and personally led counterattacks to seal hull breaches while the vacuum of space screamed through the gaps around him. The station's hull was hit so many times that by the 4th month, it was more welded patches and emergency sealant than original metal. The lights failed in entire sections, and defenders fought in darkness. Water recyclers broke down, and people survived on half rations. The medical bay ran out of anesthesia in month 6, and surgeons operated on wounded soldiers who bit down on leather straps and tried not to scream. They held, because every time a defender looked over their shoulder, they saw the refugee shelters behind them, full of alien families whose only crime had been choosing to trust humanity. And not one human soldier was willing to be the reason that trust was betrayed. When the relief fleet finally arrived in month 11, 15 Wrath-class dreadnoughts that tore through the Coalition blockade like wolves through a fence. The surviving defenders of Proxima Station stood on the battered observation deck and watched the enemy scatter, and they did not cheer. They were too tired and too hollow for cheering. They just held each other up and breathed. Far from Proxima, the war's most daring operation was already underway. Captain Yuki Tanaka of the dreadnought Daka had been given a mission that everyone knew was probably a one-way trip. A deep strike behind coalition lines to destroy the Orvani technocracy's primary weapons foundries on the industrial moon of Orvos 3. The foundries were the coalition's beating heart. Without them, the Tharn could not replace their losses, and the Kreth could not rebuild their shattered fleet. Destroy the foundries and the coalition would begin to starve. Tanaka took the Daka and 4 escort frigates through 3 enemy patrol lines, using routes that the Ashen spies had mapped at the cost of their own lives. 2 of the frigates were lost in running battles along the way, their crews fighting to the last to buy the Daka time to escape. When the Daka finally reached Orvos 3, the foundries were defended by an Orvani battle group of 40 ships. Tanaka had 1 dreadnought and 2 damaged frigates. She attacked anyway. The Battle of Orvos 3 lasted 6 hours. The Daka fought with a ferocity that the Orvani had never seen from any species. Tanaka used the moon's gravity well to slingshot her ship through the enemy formation again and again, firing at point-blank range, taking hits that would have destroyed lesser vessels, and never once breaking off the attack. By the end, the Orvani battle group was in ruins, and the Daka was dying. Her engines were gone, her weapons were failing, and fires burned in half her compartments. Tanaka ordered her crew to abandon ship. Every last one of them, 412 men and women, evacuated to the surviving frigate, while Tanaka stayed at the helm. She aimed the crippled Daka directly at the largest foundry complex on Orvos 3, engaged what was left of the engines, and opened a channel that she knew the entire galaxy would hear. For everyone who did not get to fight back, she said, the Daka struck the foundry at full speed, and the explosion turned the night side of the moon into daylight. The foundries, the production lines, the weapons stockpiles, all of it was gone in a single blinding flash. Back on Earth, the war was taking a different kind of toll. People were tired. The initial rage had carried them through the first year. But now, 3 years into the conflict, the casualties were mounting, and the end was nowhere in sight. But the protests that filled the streets were not calling for peace. Families of the 1.2 billion dead marched through every major city, carrying photographs of their lost loved ones. And their banners did not say, "Stop the war." They said, "Finish it." The pressure on General Okonkwo to escalate, to use the resonance mirrors at full power, to do to the Council worlds what had been done to Earth, was enormous. And it came not from warmongers but from grieving mothers and fatherless children who wanted the galaxy to feel what they had felt. Okonkwo refused, not because he was soft, but because he understood something that grief made it hard for others to see. That the moment humanity used its weapons the way the Council had used theirs, humanity would lose the one advantage that mattered more than any fleet. They would lose the right to call themselves better. Ambassador Vasquez, working through back channels that only she and a handful of others knew existed, had been quietly talking to the moderate species within the Council. She offered them terms, not conquest, not humiliation, but accountability. Every species that had voted for Resolution 7 Omega would formally acknowledge what they had done. They would pay reparations to Earth. They would dismantle every piece of purification technology in their possession. And they would stand before the galaxy and say the words, "We were wrong." The Salathi accepted first, then the Dren, then 3 more species. One by one the coalition crumbled from the inside, as its members realized that humanity was not offering destruction, it was offering a way out. But Arbiter Zhou Ken had one last card to play. Deep in the void between stars, hidden in a place that no map showed, a second purification weapon had been waiting for 6 years. A backup, aimed at Earth, capable of finishing what the first attack had started. He activated it with the press of a single button. Human intelligence intercepted the activation signal 4 hours before the weapon would have fired. 4 hours between humanity and extinction. A single stealth corvette, the Silent Requiem, was the only ship close enough to reach the weapon platform in time. Its crew was 6 volunteers who understood that the mission required them to fly directly into the platform's defense grid and destroy its power core from the inside. They did not hesitate. They did not send messages home. They simply turned their ship toward the weapon that would have ended their species and flew as fast as their engines could carry them. The Silent Requiem reached the platform with 12 minutes to spare. The explosion that destroyed the purification weapon was visible from 3 star systems away. The crew of 6 did not survive, and their names were added to a list that humanity was keeping very carefully. A list of debts that the galaxy owed, and that humanity intended to collect. The war did not end with a final explosion, or a last desperate battle, or a dramatic surrender on the bridge of a burning ship. It ended with a door opening. Human forces had secured the capital city of Valor Prime after the last loyalist defenders laid down their weapons, and General Idris Okonkwo walked through the ancient streets of an alien civilization that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. The buildings were tall and silver and beautiful, built by a species that had mastered architecture when humans were still living in caves. And Okonkwo looked at all of it with the calm, steady gaze of a man who had spent every day of the last 10 years carrying the weight of 1.2 billion ghosts on his shoulders. He found Arbiter Zhou Ken in his private chambers at the top of the council spire, the tallest building on the planet, a needle of crystal that caught the light of 3 suns. The Arbiter was alone. His guards had fled. His allies had abandoned him, and the coalition he had built to protect the old order had dissolved like smoke. Zhou Ken sat in a chair by a window and did not stand when Okonkwo entered. His 4 silver eyes watched the human general the way a man watches an approaching storm, with resignation and something that might have been fear. He expected to die. Every species in his experience would have killed him. It was what he would have done in Okonkwo's place. It was what any rational being would do to the architect of a genocide that had murdered 1.2 billion souls. Okonkwo pulled a chair across the room and sat down across from the Arbiter. He placed a single datapad on the table between them. On it was a file, the complete list of every human who had died in the purification. Every name, every age, every city, every family. 1.2 billion entries. "You will read them," Okonkwo said, and his voice was not angry or triumphant or cruel. It was simply firm, in the way that gravity is firm. Not something that can be argued with. Zhou Ken stared at the datapad. "All of them?" he asked. "Every single one," Okonkwo said, "and when you are finished, you will stand before the galaxy and say what you did, not what the Council did, not what Resolution 7 Omega required, what you did. You will own every name on that list." "And if I refuse?" Okonkwo leaned back in his chair and looked at the Arbiter with something that was almost pity. "Then I will leave this room, and these names will follow you for the rest of your life anyway. But you will have lost the only chance the galaxy will ever give you to face what you have done with something that resembles honor." Zhou Ken was silent for a very long time. Outside the window, human ships moved slowly across the sky like new constellations. The world he had known, the order he had maintained, the power he had wielded, all of it was gone. He reached out and picked up the datapad. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Forum, the new body that replaced the old council, convened for the first time on a neutral station in deep space. Representatives from every surviving species in the Orion Arm were present, and so were billions of viewers watching from their homeworlds. Arbiter Zhou Ken stood at the center of the chamber, alone, under a single light, and he began to read. He read the name of a 3-year-old girl from Mumbai who had been learning to count to 10 on the morning she died. He read the name of a grandmother in Lagos who had been cooking rice for her grandchildren. He read the name of a schoolteacher in Dhaka who had been writing the word tomorrow on a chalkboard. He read the name of a doctor in Kinshasa who had been holding a newborn baby when the pulse came, and both of them had fallen together. He read for 19 days. His voice broke hundreds of times. There were moments when he could not continue and stood in silence with his 4 eyes closed, and the galaxy waited for him. No one told him to hurry. No one told him to stop. The forum simply waited, while the arbiter carried the weight of what he had done, one name at a time. When he finished, when the last name had been spoken into the silence of a chamber where no one breathed, Joken set down the datapad and looked out at the assembled species of the galaxy. "I did this," he said. "Not the council, not policy, not necessity. I did this because I believed your lives were worth more than theirs, and I was wrong. I was wrong in a way that language does not have words for, and I will carry these names until I die." He stepped down from the podium and was taken into custody, and the galaxy exhaled. The Treaty of Remembrance was signed on the same day, and it rebuilt the order of the galaxy from the ground up. The old Galactic Council, with its hierarchy of elder species and junior members, and unspoken rules about who mattered and who did not, was dissolved permanently. In its place, the Galactic Forum was established, a body in which every species, whether they had traveled the stars for 10,000 years or 10, held an equal vote and an equal voice. Purification technology, all of it, every blueprint, every component, every theoretical framework, was banned. Not just banned, but declared a crime against existence itself. Any species found developing or possessing such technology would face the collective response of every other species in the forum. The nations that had voted for Resolution 7 Omega were required to pay reparations to Earth, not in currency, but in knowledge, in technology, in resources that would help humanity rebuild what had been taken. And they paid, because the alternative was to be remembered forever as the species that murdered over 1 billion people and then refused to say sorry. And humanity was offered a seat on the forum's executive council, the highest position in the new galactic order, a permanent seat with veto power over military action, a recognition of what they had suffered and what they had accomplished. Ambassador Lena Vasquez, who had stood in a bunker 10 years ago and watched 1.2 billion of her people die, walked to the podium to give her answer. Every species in the galaxy watched. "We did not fight this war for power," she said. "We did not build those ships or send our sons and daughters to die so that we could sit in a chair that another species used to sit in. We fought because no one should ever have to be afraid to exist." She paused and looked around the chamber, at the Valori delegates who would not meet her eyes, at the Salathi who were weeping openly, at the Kreth who sat in rigid silence, at the dozens of species who had watched a genocide happen and done nothing until it was too late. "We decline the seat," she said, "not because we do not want it, but because that is not what this was for. We did this so that no species, anywhere, would ever again be afraid to sit at their own table." She stepped down, and the chamber erupted in a sound that had no translation. Not applause exactly, but something deeper. A sound of recognition, of shame, of gratitude, of awe. In orbit above Earth, the memorial was completed 1 year later. It was a ring of light that circled the planet, 1.2 billion individual points of light, each one coded to a specific life that had been lost, each one visible from the surface on a clear night. Humanity called it the necklace, and it became the most visited site in the galaxy. Alien pilgrims traveled from every corner of the Orion Arm to see it. They came in silence, and they left in silence, and many of them wept for people they had never met, and a species they had once dismissed as primitive. 20 years after the purification, a woman named Priya Anand walked through the halls of the Galactic Forum. She was 32 years old now, tall and steady, with dark eyes that held a warmth that surprised everyone who met her. She was Earth's ambassador to the Forum. The girl who had once read names into a camera was now the voice of humanity among the stars. Alien diplomats stepped aside as she passed, not out of fear, though they remembered what humanity could do. They stepped aside out of respect for a species that had been handed every reason to become monsters and had chosen not to. Priya paused at a window that overlooked the stars, billions of them, scattered across the darkness like seeds waiting to grow, and she touched the pendant around her neck. It was a small glass vial on a silver chain, and inside it was a pinch of soil from Mumbai, from the street where her parents had fallen. She held it for a moment and then let it go, and she smiled, because the galaxy was different now, and her parents would have been proud of what it had become. Outside the window, a human cargo ship passed slowly, carrying supplies to a Valori colony that had been damaged in a storm. Beside it flew a Salafi medical frigate, heading to a Kreth outpost that had requested aid. And behind them both, barely visible against the stars, the faint glow of the necklace shone above a small blue planet that had once been dismissed as insignificant. The galaxy had called them monsters, and the monsters had answered, not with the fury the galaxy feared, but with something far more devastating. A mercy it had never earned.